My stepmom gave me a 2-day ultimatum to leave the house because she wants to start fresh with my dad and stepsister and said, old trash like me can't be a part of the new family. 3 months later, she showed up at my aunt's house, threatening to take me to court because I didn't inform her about my dad's abusive behavior. Hi, my name is Maya, 19 female. My mom and dad were high school sweethearts, the kind who got married right after graduating and seemed destined for a picture-perfect life. I don't know how their marriage was before I was born, but from the moment I can remember, my mom was always unhappy. My dad, well, he had a really bad drinking habit. It's not like I ever saw him passed out on the street or anything, but he would have a few beers right when he got home, more with dinner, and then a few nightcaps before bed. It might not seem like much, but it made him short-tempered and mean. Both of them would often get into screaming matches, and my mom would end up crying. Sometimes, the fights would start over stuff as small as my dad forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. My mom would sigh, just this disappointment little noise, and that was all it took. He would yell about how she nagged him, how nothing he ever did was enough, and she would shout back about how tired she was of always picking up the slack, working full-time, taking care of me, and managing a house with a husband who acted like a grumpy teenager. It always ended with slammed doors and my mom sobbing in her room. On the other nights, the arguments were about how much he spent at the bar with his buddies. He would go out after work on Fridays, and sure, he would come home, but more often than not, he was sloppy drunk, stumbling in way past midnight. Mom would be furious, screaming that he was blowing all their savings on booze. He would slur back some insult about how she wouldn't know a good time if it bit her. And then it would really get ugly. One night, I remember being woken up by their yelling. I snuck down the hall and peeked into the living room. My dad was smashed, leaning on the kitchen counter and waving a beer bottle around, while mom was backed into the far corner, her arms in front of her face like she was scared of him. I still don't know exactly what they were arguing about, but I remember him getting in her face, yelling and yelling until I couldn't take the sound of it anymore. I ran back to my room and burrowed under the covers. There were nights they would argue about how his drinking made him a bad father. He would miss my soccer games, come home late after promising to take me to the park, or fall asleep on the couch instead of reading me a bedtime story. Mom would be so frustrated, and she wouldn't hold back about telling him what a lousy dad he was. He would fire back about how she should be grateful that he was working at all, and that would just make things escalate. One time, this sticks out the most. My mom yelled about how he smelled like a brewery and that she was disgusted to sleep in the same bed with him. He got this nasty sneer on his face and made some awful comments about her being frigid anyway. I didn't even know what frigid meant, but I knew it was bad from the way my mom gasped like he'd punched her. After that, she slept on the couch for a week. I don't want you to think it was like this every single day. There were good times too, or at least quiet times, but the weight of his drinking always hung over everything. His job, my mom's stress, my fear. The shadow of that next fight was always there, lurking right around the corner. When I was 11, my world fell apart. Mom got cancer. It was this sudden, terrible thing, and it felt like our whole family was teetering on the edge of a cliff. One minute, everything was sort of normal. Well, as normal as it ever got. And the next, doctors were using scary words, and my mom was crying all the time. Unfortunately, this didn't change anything with my dad. He was still the same old guy. The drinking didn't stop. At best, he would just disappear for hours to drown his sorrows at the bar. At worst, he would come home late, even drunker than usual, and pick fights with my mom when she was too weak to even get out of bed. My grandmother, bless her heart, moved in with us to take care of my mom and me. She became this lifeline, cooking meals, helping my mom bathe, taking over the household chores that had fallen by the wayside. She would also take my mom to her appointments, the endless rounds of chemo and doctor visits. One time, I remember my mom was so sick after chemo, throwing up for hours, and my grandma was right there, holding her hair, cleaning her up, never once looking disgusted or complaining. While dad was out getting drunk, grandma was the one truly holding us all together. There was this other time. I remember mom had a radiation treatment, and she was shaking with nerves beforehand. My dad, as usual, was nowhere to be found. Grandma sat with her, holding her hand and whispering silly stories from her childhood to distract her. She even made my mom laugh, just a little smile, but it was like a ray of sunshine cutting through the gloom. Grandma was always the one to get me to school on time, pack my lunches, and help me with homework every night. And when mom was having a bad day, those days when she was too tired or too sad to even talk, my grandma would pull me into the kitchen and we would bake cookies, or she would help me with the gardening. She didn't try to replace mom, but she gave me some sense of normal, a soft place to land when everything else was so hard. However, treatments didn't work. My mom, my lifeline, the only source of tenderness in that house, died just a few months later. My world shattered. Suddenly, everything changed for me. Now, I was all alone with a dad who was only a father in name. It was a brutal turning point, forcing me to grow up faster than any kid should have to. Losing mom was like getting sucked into a black hole. The grief was this crushing weight, this constant ache in my chest. But there was this other part too, a kind of desperate anger. How could my dad be so heartless, so absent even now? My grandma, still holding the entire family together, was the one who planned the funeral. She chose a pale blue dress, mom's favorite color, and gently brushed her hair until it felt soft around her shoulders. Dad was there, physically, but he might as well have been on another planet. He didn't shed a tear during the whole service, and there was almost this relief in his eyes, like a burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He was never at home after that. Even more than before, his escape was the bottle, and some nights, I wouldn't even hear him come in at all. It became my responsibility, mine, to keep things from falling apart completely. At 12 years old, I started to cook dinner. Simple things at first, but I got better. I fumbled my way through laundry, figuring out what could be bleached and what had to hang dry. There would be nights when I would lie in bed, the whole weight of the house pressing down on me. Tears would sting my eyes, for my mom, for all the ways my childhood had been stolen, and from exhaustion so deep it settled into my bones. Still, every morning, I would get up, get dressed, and go to school. I wasn't going to let my whole life crumble along with my family. It wasn't just the practical stuff though. It was the emotional holes, the one no one else could fill. My friends meant well, but they didn't understand what it was like to come home to an empty house. No one to ask about my day. No one to help with the ever-present lump of sadness in my throat. Dad existed as a blurry background figure, and sometimes I'd wonder if he even noticed the changes. The fridge stocked with food, the laundry basket less overflowing, my report card tapped to the refrigerator door with no one to even glance at it. I eventually got used to it. Not that it was okay, but the sharp edges of the grief softened, and the constant panic eased just a little. It hurt less, and that in itself was a kind of relief. I graduated high school not with top honors, but I got my diploma. My dad didn't come to the ceremony. It was just my grandma and my mom's sister, Aunt Penny, 37 female, cheering in the stands, looking both proud and a little heartbroken. I wanted to go to college, desperately. Seeing my friends get accepted into their dream schools and packing their bags for dorm rooms, it was this dull ache in my chest. But with my responsibilities at home, my grades had suffered. I tried staying up late to study after cleaning the kitchen, or collapsing with my textbooks while laundry spun in the dryer. Some nights though, I was just too tired, and the weight of it all would press me down onto the mattress until sleep was the only escape. I'd applied to a few colleges, but to no surprise, the acceptance letters never came. I was crushed, but not defeated. I figured I could always try again next year. For now, I would get a job, earn some money, and try to find ways to boost my resume, volunteer work, maybe some online courses. It wasn't the life that I'd imagined, not by a long shot, but I was determined to carve out whatever little piece of my own future I could. Working at the local grocery store wasn't glamorous, but the routine gave my life some structure. I started saving as much of my paychecks as possible, squirreling the money away in a battered shoebox under my bed. It was slow, but watching that pile of cash grow was the most empowering thing I'd felt in years. It was a lifeline, this tiny flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a different path waiting out there for me. somewhere beyond this tired house and its lingering ghosts. However, during this time, something changed. My dad started drinking less. No longer would he stumble through the door reeking of beer or fall asleep on the couch with the TV blaring. I realized later that this change was because he was dating a woman named Rebecca. He dated other women over the years after mom died, brief flings that never amounted to much. But Rebecca was different. I guess he really liked her, enough to try to clean up his act. At first, I was relieved. The smell of stale alcohol wasn't hanging in the air every evening. There weren't any more screaming matches echoing through the house. He started cooking dinner sometimes, simple but edible meals. He'd even ask about my day, a rusty attempt at conversation that made my heart clench more than anything. But the truth is, I never trusted it. Not really. I'd seen this too many times before. Even with mom, he would go through periods where he would try, swear things would change, only to fall back into his old patterns. They both took things too fast. One minute they were dating, spending almost every weekend together. The next, Rebecca was showing me a sparkly ringer on her finger, and my dad was beaming this goofy grin I hadn't seen in years. Before I could even process it, they were married. A small backyard ceremony with just our close relatives. I half-heartedly attended the wedding, but deep down, I felt this hollow pang of resentment. Rebecca had a daughter, Emily, 18 female, who was a year younger than me. Just like that, our quiet house transformed into a chaotic mess. All four of us were now living together, and it felt like all the household responsibilities I had carefully shouldered crashed down on me tenfold. My workload wasn't just double, it felt like it had tripled. Suddenly, I was doing laundry for 4 people instead of 2, keeping track of 2 teens' messy rooms instead of just my own, and constantly washing an endless tide of dishes. The grocery trips turned into these epic hauls that ate up half my paycheck, and the fridge was always inexplicably empty, no matter how much food I bought just a few days before. There were nights when I would just finish my shift at the grocery store, drag myself home exhausted, only to find a sink overflowing with dirty dishes and a chorus of "What's for dinner?" The old familiar anger would twist in my gut. It wasn't fair. I eventually stopped trying. I'd grab takeout on my way home from work, leaving the kitchen to its sticky, crumb-filled fate. I only cleaned my own room and did my own laundry. Let Rebecca and Emily deal with their own mess. I was done being everyone's Cinderella. Of course, Rebecca noticed. It's not like I was trying to be subtle. One night, after the kitchen looked like a bomb had gone off and the kitchen had started to smell, she cornered me. "Maya, you've been slacking on your duties around here," she began, her voice pitched in that overly sweet tone that was way more irritating than a yell. I just shrugged. Whatever. It wasn't worth the fight, not really. She kept going though, her tone getting sharper with each word. "You've been living here for free, and it's about time you started compensating for it. We all need to pull our weight." It was like a switch flipped inside me. All the exhaustion, the resentment, the unfairness of it all suddenly bubbled to the surface. "It's my dad's house," I snapped, "not yours, and who are you to tell me what to do?" The words hung in the air, charged and angry. Rebecca glared at me, her face tight. It was clear. I wasn't playing the role of the grateful stepdaughter anymore, and it seriously ruffled her feathers. Good. It was about time someone around here realized I wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. However, just 2 days later, the whole situation exploded. I'd gotten home late from work, my legs aching, my brain buzzing with the effort of trying to calculate how I was going to stretch my next paycheck until payday. All I wanted was to go into bed and sleep for a decade. But Rebecca intercepted me, blocking my path to my room. "Maya, we need to talk," she said. There was a tightness in her voice that sent a shiver of dread down my spine. "I'm exhausted," I mumbled, trying to step around her. "Can't this wait?" "No, it can't," she cut me off. "I want you out of this house within 2 days." I must have looked like a deer caught in headlights, because for a moment, I couldn't even process what she had said. "Are you kicking me out? Seriously?" Rebecca's lip tightened. "Look, it's time for a fresh start in this house. Your dad and I, Emily, we're going to be a real family. And old trash like you just doesn't fit the picture anymore." Her words stung more than any slap. "Old trash," I repeated, the anger finally rising above the shock. "This is my house, my mom." I couldn't even finish the sentence. Desperation clawed at my throat. I rushed to my dad's room, pounding on the door until he finally opened it, looking irritated. I told him what Rebecca had said, searching his face for a flicker of denial, some sign that he wasn't going to let this happen. His gaze flickered away from mine. "Maya," he started, his voice heavy and tired. "You're 19, an adult. It's time you acted like one. Time you stood on your own 2 feet." The world seemed to tilt sideways. My dad, the one who barely even noticed my existence most days, was using the word adult as an excuse to get rid of me. It wasn't about responsibility. It was about convenience, about wiping the slate clean, pretending those years of hurt and neglect never happened so he could have his picture-perfect do-over. My own father was choosing her over me. I spent the entire night crying. The betrayal, the unfairness of it all, cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. It was like all those years of holding the house together, of trying to make up for his failures as a father, had been for nothing. The next morning, I packed a small bag and slipped out before anyone woke up. My feet carried me on autopilot to Grandma's familiar house. Aunt Penny was there when I arrived, her face etched with worry as I stumbled through the door and collapsed in her arms. I spilled out everything. The blow-up with Rebecca, Dad's cold dismissal, and all she did was hold me tighter, murmuring soft words of comfort while my tears finally ran dry. "Oh, Maya," Aunt Penny said gently as I finally calmed enough to talk. "You don't deserve this. You can stay with me as long as you need to." Her words were a balm, a tiny lifeline in the storm. Knowing I wasn't completely alone eased the ache just a little. Still, a deep, jagged hurt remained. It's one thing to have your dad be distant, to feel neglected while he's caught up in his own problems. It's entirely another to have him actively choose someone else, a total stranger in some ways, over his own flesh and blood. That kind of pain left a wound that couldn't be fixed with a hug or a warm home. That same night, fueled by anger and a bone-deep weariness, I packed my bags. I stuffed the essentials into a duffel bag I hadn't used since middle school, slung my beat-up guitar case over my shoulder, and left before the first light of dawn crept into my room. It felt strange, slipping away like a thief, but I couldn't face another day in that house under their judgmental gazes. No tearful goodbyes, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet escape. Moving into Aunt Penny's was a balm. Her house was small and cozy, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the sound of her ever-present laughter. The best part, there was no endless list of chores waiting for me. She would gently remind me to keep my room tidy, and I would help out around the house. But it felt like a fair contribution, not the weight of the world on my shoulders. The biggest relief, though, was financial. No longer spending almost my entire paycheck on groceries for a house full of people. I actually started to see my savings account grow. I could buy new clothes when mine got too worn, treat myself to a coffee and a good book, and even start dreaming again about taking classes and getting a better job. For the first time in ages, it felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a sliver of light at the end of the tunnel. It wasn't the same as having a family that truly loved me, but it was a start. A sign that I could survive and maybe even thrive on my own. However, about 3 months later, the fragile piece I'd carved out for myself was shattered. It was a Sunday, one of my first lazy days off in what felt like forever. I was sprawled on the couch, half watching a terrible reality show when a furious knocking pounded on the front door. Aunt Penny wasn't home, so with a sigh, I dragged myself up and opened the door. It was Rebecca. Her perfect makeup was smudged, eyes red-rimmed. Before I could even say a word, she launched into a tirade. "You ruined my life," she shrieked, her voice shrill with anger. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me your dad was an abusive alcoholic?" For a moment, all I could do was stare. Then a bitter laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. "Are you serious, Rebecca? Are you blaming me for your own terrible decisions? You're a grown-ass woman. You could have figured this out on your own." "He's back to his old habits," she wailed, ignoring my words. "I had no idea, and you just stood by and let me marry him." The absurdity of it all was almost too much. "Go back, Rebecca," I said, my voice tight. "He'll sober up for a few months, swear he's changed, then the whole cycle starts again. Don't pretend you were blind to this." And then she hit me with this. "I'm gonna sue you. You didn't warn me about your deadbeat dad." I actually laughed out loud. "You're gonna sue me? Because I failed to warn you about my deadbeat dad?" I laughed again, a harsh sound that echoed in the stillness. Go ahead. I'm sure the judge will be fascinated. I slammed the door in her face, but my whole body trembling with a mix of anger and a strange twisted amusement. However, I am now a little worried. Can she sue me? There are no grounds, but I wanted to confirm. Hi everyone. Thank you all for your support. Even though I knew she couldn't sue me, I was still worried knowing that I could not afford legal help. I do have some more updates. After I told my aunt what had happened, she was really angry. She told me to come with her. We drove to my dad's house, my old house I guess. My aunt was ready to have a showdown with my dad and Rebecca. But when we reached there, no one answered the door. The front door wasn't even locked, so my aunt and I went inside. We were shocked to see just how much of a mess the house was. Everything was out of place. Clothes were piled up in chairs, dishes littered the kitchen counters, and it looked like someone had just upended all the drawers and cabinets in the living room. It was like a tornado had ripped through the place. My old room was the worst. It was clear they'd been using it as a dumping ground for anything they didn't want to deal with. Old boxes were stacked against the wall, random furniture crowded the space, and there were even bags filled with what smelled like rotten food shoved in the corner. There was no one in the house. I tried to call my dad, Rebecca and Emily, but there was no answer. We eventually left. This all felt really weird. I don't know what exactly happened, but I am now thinking that things must have been really bad that forced Rebecca to come and confront me. Could my dad abuse have gotten worse? Did things unravel that quickly between them? Honestly, a part of me felt some relief. I mean, it served them right if they were now miserable together. But then there was Emily. She was just a kid, and it wasn't fair that she had to be caught up in the middle of all this mess. I am trying to find out what happened, and I will keep you guys updated. Hi guys, I know it's been a few weeks, but let me update you on the whole insane saga of my dad and Rebecca. It took some digging, but my grandma, the queen of small town gossip, eventually managed to get the scoop from one of her church friends who's connected to Rebecca's mom. Turns out, the drama at my old house escalated pretty fast before I slammed the door on Rebecca that day. My dad, surprise surprise, went right back to his old drinking routine. The arguments with Rebecca, when he'd come home drunk, must have been brutal. And that visit to my place must have been a sign of her desperation. One night, after he stumbled home wasted, they got into it about money and how he was blowing all their savings on booze. He sneered something at her about how she was only there for a free ride anyway, and that's when it got really ugly. There was yelling and accusations flying back and forth about broken promises and wasted time. Another time, Rebecca brought up some issue with Emily, something about her grades slipping or getting in with a bad crowd. Instead of being a concerned parent, my dad got defensive and blamed it on Rebecca for being a naggy stepmother. Rebecca fired back that if he'd actually sober up and be a father for once, maybe their daughter wouldn't be acting out. There were probably countless other little jabs, resentments bubbling up that could never be fixed. I'm sure Rebecca held on to some hope for a long time, thinking his promises to change were real. He'd probably even convinced himself at some point. But in the end, the alcohol always won, and their whole marriage crumbled in the worst possible way. But the real breaking point, the part that made my stomach clench with a mix of anger and pity, was this. One night, during one of their screaming matches, Emily tried to intervene. My half-sister probably thought she could fix things, and my dad, in his drunken haze, shoved her. That, right there, is what finally snapped Rebecca out of whatever delusion she was holding onto. She must have realized there was no changing him, no happy family ending to salvage. When my dad showed up the next day, expecting things to blow over like they always did, he found Rebecca gone and the house half empty. It's hard to describe how this news made me feel. Anger at my dad for sure, for never even trying to control himself, for hurting Emily. But there's sadness too, and this weird sense of guilt. Had I seen it coming? Could I have done something differently? It turns out that Rebecca's confrontation with me was a cry for help, and I just pushed her away. I do feel a little guilty, but she's the one who kicked me out. Also, and this is where it gets juicy, I heard a rumor that Rebecca already has a new man. Someone saw her holding hands with some guy at the mall. Can you believe it? I don't know if it's true. Might just be a small town gossip, but if it is, wow, that's a whole different level of messed up. Honestly, part of me feels bad for her. Getting mixed up with my dad was a colossal mistake, but then, a spiteful little part of me thinks, good for her. maybe a fresh start is exactly what she needs. As for my dad, I have no idea what he's up to. He hasn't called, hasn't shown up at Aunt Penny's making a scene. I don't know if he's back at the old house wallowing in misery, or if he's already found his next warm body and a full-stocked liquor cabinet to crash in. And honestly, I don't really care. The truth is, I'm done letting chaos control my life. Every time I think I'm over it, something else crops up, dragging me back into their mess. I'm trying so hard to just focus on myself, taking classes at the community college, working my butt off at the grocery store, saving up every penny I can. There are nights when I lay awake, the anger and worry simmering below the surface, threatening to boil over. But I remind myself, I survived their dysfunction, I got myself out, and now it's time for me to build a life that's actually mine. Hello everyone, I know it's been 3 months since my last update, and honestly, I'm glad to say things have been kinda boring, quiet even, which after all the chaos is exactly what I needed. We finally got confirmation on the Rebecca front. Turns out, that mole sighting wasn't just a rumor. Rebecca's not only moved on, but she sent divorce papers to my dad. They're deep in the messy process now, probably dividing up furniture neither of them will actually use and arguing about who gets to keep the hideous couch in the basement. Good riddance is all I can say. As for me, well, I have some amazing news. I got into college, a real university, the kind I never thought I'd had a chance at. I'm leaving in just a few days, and the nerves are starting to kick in. New city, new dorm room, and a whole new life to figure out. It's scary and exhilarating all at once. Of course, I'll have to work part-time to make ends meet, and the scholarship only covers so much, but those years of scrimping and saving are finally paying off. I've got enough to get me through the first few months without completely starving at least. I'm ready to work hard, to study even harder, and to create a future that's entirely, completely mine. And to all of you, a huge thank you. This is a cheesy thing to say, but I don't know how I would have gotten through this without your support. Knowing there were people out there rooting for me, even strangers, somehow made all the difference. It helped me believe in myself when I was feeling lost and alone. I'm walking away from the wreckage of my childhood with my head high, ready to face whatever comes next. And whatever that is, I'm certain it's going to be a hell of a lot better than what I left behind. And that was it for today's story. Thank you very much for listening. Smash that like button for me and subscribe for more stories. Thanks again, and we'll be seeing you in the next one.